I feel you. Okay, I'll make a start. I'll welcome everyone, and I'm just going to talk about why we're doing this today. So today we're gathering to discuss a topic that affects millions of people worldwide, and that's diabetes. It's not just a disease; it's a complex condition that significantly impacts one's quality of life and is classed as a disability. We'll be exploring the multifaceted nature of diabetes from its physical manifestations to its psychological and emotional toll. We'll delve into the importance of well-being, as well-being is the theme of this year, and we'll talk about mental health, nutrition, and physical activity as well. But this conversation isn't just about managing the condition, it's about breaking down the stigma, raising awareness, and empowering individuals with diabetes. We'll discuss the latest advancements in treatment, the power of community support, and the role of advocacy in shaping a brighter future for people living with diabetes. So let's embark on this journey together. Let's listen, learn, and inspire one another. So we've got a number of guests speaking about either their own journey or that of someone close to them. We also have Dr. Hector Gomer on the call with us. I'm not sure if he's joined yet. Who will give us like
He's
a
on.
medical. He is on. Okay, fabulous. He'll give us a medical view on diabetes, and we'll touch on why it's more prevalent in South Asian and Afro-Caribbean backgrounds as well. The chat's open and it's live for you to ask any questions. So please use it to ask anyone on the panel questions. Dr. Hector Goma, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. Can I get you to give us a clinical definition of diabetes, please?
Right. Diabetes is a condition where the body is either not producing a chemical messenger, which we all know as insulin, is either not producing it or it's producing it, but it's not effective in how it handles the metabolism or the breakdown of glucose from the carbohydrates that we take in our diet. So the real issue is insulin. As either no insulin, which you find in type 1 diabetes, or there's insulin, but I use the analogy that insulin is like the pin that you put at the ATM and your money comes out. Insulin opens the door for glucose to go from the blood vessels into the cells, and that mechanism is not working well, which you find in type 2 diabetes. So the end result is that the blood sugar rises because insulin is not able to move the blood glucose from the blood vessels into the cells for the cells to eat. And that's what diabetes is.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Hector Goma. Joe, can I come to you first, please, to share your journey on Mukhtar? Because I know when you'd found out that Mukhtar had got diabetes, his sugar levels were scarily high. What were the things that you'd spotted, and what prompted you to get him seen with a doctor?
Yeah, okay. So Mukhtar is West African heritage, so he is high risk for diabetes. And we were on holiday in 2019. I think it's, when you're on holiday, you actually stop and pay attention to each other a bit more, I think, than you'd normally do. And he had lost a lot of weight, but he was exercising a bit more and he changed his diet a little bit. So he was really happy. I've lost a lot of weight, I'm looking good. But he was drinking water all the time, like constantly, to a point that just wasn't usual. And he was waking me up about 3 times a night to go to the toilet as well. So like his drinking of water had really changed, and his patterns around needing to urinate had really changed as well. And I have experience of both my mum and my brothers have type 2 diabetes. So I said to him, look, I know you think I'm being stupid. And he did really think I was being stupid. But I said, I just would really like it when we get back home from this holiday, please, could you go and see the doctor? And he made an appointment with the doctor and walked through the door and said, my wife's made me be here. And the doctor laughed at him really and was like, because he looks really healthy. He's not overweight. He's muscular. He goes to the gym. He'd lost a lot of weight. And And I said, oh, there'll be nothing wrong with you. But he then later that day got a phone, very, very panicked call from the doctor asking him to come back to the GP. And there was a big conversation about whether to admit him or not, because his blood sugar was at, I think it was about 36. A normal blood sugar is between 5 or 7. And through tests, he developed type 1 diabetes as a kind of mid-30s, which I didn't realise that could happen. I thought if you were didn't develop type 1 diabetes, that would happen as an adolescent or a child. I didn't realise it was something that could happen in your 30s. And he went through, I'd say, kind of the next 3 weeks were very intensive of us learning as a family how to cope, what he can eat, at what points he has to take injections to make himself better. I think over time, both technology has improved and his understanding of his diabetes has improved. He eats a lot of rice. It's a big part of a West African diet. He eats less rice, like he still eats it every day, but in lesser quantities. I think he has one of those Libra systems that's on his attached to his mobile phone, so that he can test himself and know where he is at any good time. And he's very sensible. He's adapted well, because I think some of it is the health implications and some of it is the mental health implications of having such a big lifestyle change. And Mukhtar has been he's adapted his lifestyle very well. But I think it's a hard journey for people to go through, and understanding what that means for them. And obviously that we're Muslim, so he didn't drink anyway. So I think some of the changes that can be difficult to make in a lifestyle where you have that kind of diagnosis, he has adopted really well.
That's great to hear. How did you find, like, if it affected his well-being, Joel?
I think at first it was understanding it and there is a lot more doctor's appointments that you have to go to, and understanding, like, unfortunately his mum died from diabetic complications in Sierra Leone, where the healthcare isn't the same as the healthcare is here. So he was very scared about what that meant for him. I suppose just coming to terms with what does that mean in terms of prognosis for your healthy life. But no, he's really well in terms of kind of the way that he's taken it on board.
Good. No, thank you so much, Joel. Sam, I'm just going to ask you to come in here. So, Sam, you were diagnosed with diabetes as a very young child.
I was 4, yeah, in 1977. So I'm coming up to my 47th year on insulin. A little bit more dramatic with children. I was very lucky. My mum was a pharmacist, so when she spotted the signs, she took me to the doctor. The doctor said, "Oh, don't be silly, you're worrying about nothing," and sent us home. My mum was not a happy bunny, but she managed to buy a kit from work, in those days a urine kit, and read the instructions. I couldn't read it and asked me to pee in a potty. And at 4, I was potty trained, so I was not impressed by this at all. But we did the urine tablet, an old clinic test, and normally it should be blue. Your urine, you drop enough urine on it to make it dissolve, and normally it should go blue. Mine was black, which means it's very high concentrations of sugar. I tested fasting first thing on a Sunday morning. I was allowed my tea, but I was allowed the Sunday lunch. Heavy on the meat, light on the vegetables. I remember that meal precisely because I wasn't allowed to eat anything else that day. I was allowed to drink water, and that was it. And the next day, my mum borrowed the car and she drove me to hospital, and we waited all day in hospital trying to get a blood test. And by the time, so we arrived at about must have been 9:30, because my mum dropped my dad at work, and we waited all day in hospital, and they finally said, well, yes, you should go up to paediatrics. And by the time we got to pediatrics, those days, no mobile phones. My dad didn't even have a telephone on his desk. So my mum drove across Ipswich to pick him up. And by the time she got back, I don't know if anybody reads Calvin and Hobbes, but I think I explained my position very well. Mum had said, you're going to have an injection and that's going to make you better. And that's going to be it for life. You know, you're going to have to inject every day. But they were trying to set up a drip and I was arguing the toss. I was saying, no, my mum said it was going to be an injection. I don't consent to this. Apparently she heard me screaming, so I was throwing a tantrum while 4 nurses were trying to hold me down. The registrar, my mum came into the room and said, what on earth is going on? And the registrar pulled my mum out of the room and said, you've got to do something. I'm trying to set up a drip before her veins collapse. You know, it's that touch and go. We don't get people walk in with blood sugar that high, especially not that young. And I spent the night in hospital and on an insulin drip to try and get my blood sugar down. I was in severe DKA.
Wow. And Sam, like, just to touch on like the symptoms in children, what are those symptoms that present?
Exactly the same. I really hate when they talk about fatigue. Well, when they talk about tiredness, it's fatigue. Walking across, by the time I was diagnosed, walking across the room felt like a marathon. Your muscles hurt, everything hurts. Your body is burning up trying to give it the energy you need to move. So any movement is extremely hard. Type 1, I can't talk about type 2. I've never been type 2, but that's what it's like with type 1. I never wet the bed, even as a 4-year-old. I always got up. But you will drink. I hated milk. I still do not like milk. That is the last thing I will drink on the planet. You are so thirsty, you will drink anything because your body is desperately trying to flush out the toxins that are building up.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that,
If it's
Sam.
treated early, you don't need to get to that state. And my HB1C is 5.9%, which I would not be diagnosed as a diabetic if I was tested.
Oh wow, so you've managed it really well.
It's hard work. I work very hard at it. I make decisions. I mean, there was a really nice study done at Harvard University that said type 1s make 140 decisions a day. And I'm thinking, that's a light day. You know, that's a day when everything's working. It is every decision, everything you do, you make a decision on. I weigh the food at home because it makes my life easier. If I'm out, there are days when I don't, but if I can, I control it quite strictly because I feel better for it. When I was younger, and younger in my diabetic life as well as my old, you know, my normal life, you recover better. As you get older, that recovery doesn't happen as quickly. But it's an autoimmune condition, and once that autoimmune condition happens, that's it. There is no way back. I mean, some of the research that's going on is really interesting because they're looking at potentially stopping that. And if you've got people who are susceptible, they're talking about screening families. So in your husband's case, Joe, your husband might have been picked up because he had 2 family members, both directly in his line, and they're thinking about potentially screening those people to spot when the autoimmune condition is triggered. Type 2 is a little bit different. If I put on a lot of weight, my insulin requirements go up. And we think a lot of what we call lifestyle type 2 is to do with that. And some people manage really well to get their weight down enough so they don't need treatment. But that is a constant battle. That isn't something you can do and then walk away from. You are diabetic, you're just not on tablets or insulin yet.
Dr. Hector Goma.
That's harder.
Sorry, no, of course. Thank you so much, Sam. Dr. Hector Goma, I was going to bring you in just to touch on diabetes type 2. Harriet, I've seen that you've posted something. I'll go in and read that in a second. Would you mind just elaborating a little bit more on type 2 for us, please.
Right. Okay, let's just start from the beginning when we eat. So when we eat, most of our food is either carbohydrates, protein, or fat. And when the food gets to the intestines break the carbohydrate down to glucose. So the glucose goes into the bloodstream from the the intestines. So when this high level of glucose gets to the pancreas is sensitive to the levels of glucose because specific cells, we know the beta cells in the pancreas, when glucose is high, that causes the pancreas to release insulin, the chemical messenger, into the bloodstream. So insulin is like the key that unlocks the door, as I mentioned at the beginning. So it is the first thing is the amount of carbohydrate in our diet is what kind of is directly responsible for the pancreas releasing insulin. So what then happens is every time we have food that is high in carbohydrate, the pancreas releases insulin, and then the insulin gets the glucose into the cells, and subsequently the glucose level falls. And then that's a kind of the homeostasis, as it were. But the more we eat foods that are high in carbohydrate, the pancreas keeps releasing insulin. It gets to a point. What happens, which many of us don't realize, is that every time the body releases insulin, part of the glucose is actually deposited as fat by the body. The excess glucose is deposited as fat. So a lot of times we as clinicians, and I guess with the impact, with the effect of industry, we give patients the impression that the problem is fat in the diet. Yes, there is good fat and there is bad fat, but the number one problem is the sugar or the glucose in the food that we eat, which leads to excess production of insulin, and ultimately we have insulin resistance and weight gain. And it is now the insulin resistance which now makes the body not move the glucose as well as it should, which now leads to the high level of glucose, hence the ultimate diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. In the UK, there are about 5 million people living with type 2 diabetes. About 1 million people don't even know they have type 2 diabetes. So the main issue is high carbohydrates, high glucose, high insulin, insulin resistance, diabetes type 2.
Right, I see. Okay. No, thank you so much. Thank you, Doctor. Aisha, I'm going to bring you into the conversation. So your husband is type 1 diabetic. I guess one of the questions I want to ask is how important is a strong support system for people with diabetes? Because your husband's had a couple of complications, hasn't he, with diabetes? Are you okay to share that?
Yeah, definitely. I think the support network either comes from people that actually have diabetes and understand it, so they understand the lived experience. But it is difficult, really, really difficult. I'm going to get emotional because I was already getting emotional coming onto this, but I think in our culture, I think men are so bad at even acknowledging that there is a problem until something seriously happens, and that's when they take note that I've got to do something, or because otherwise I think they're just living in denial. And my husband was like this for a long time, and he's got a needle phobia, so that didn't help either. So he was asked often to come and get his diabetes checked. And with him, his whole family's got it. So his mom has it, his brothers are type 1, his mom's type 2. So I think he knew that he was gonna eventually somehow end up with it, but he lived in denial for, I think, a good 10, 12 years and didn't manage it properly. But now we see what's going on, and it's really hard. Sometimes I do find life really hard, having to support someone who mentally has taken everything away from him, is the way that I see it. Unfortunately, he lost his leg due to diabetes 2 years ago. So his leg had to be amputated as a complication of diabetes. He lost his peripheral vision to his eye, to one of his eyes. So basically, they told him he can't drive anymore. So I think when you are living in denial, I don't think until it happens to you, you don't actually realize how much your life has been taken away from you, because that's exactly how he feels now, that he feels like his life has been taken away to the things that he could have done. What I didn't even realize is that whilst all this was happening, and this is only from like a 2 to 3 year span, that he actually had 2 mini strokes, and I didn't even have a clue that that happened to him. I saw something was really strange with him one day, and he was not with it. His speech went like, and it took him a long time to get his coordinations right, but then he went to normal. And it's only until that they called him in for some from testing and scans that they asked him, do you know that you had a stroke? And he's like, no, like, what are you talking about? And they actually said that you've had 2 minor strokes, as a complications on this. He lost his leg, and then last year, so this is why doctors say a lot that your feet, like, look after your feet, wear proper shoes, etc. when you're diabetic, because what last year he ended up with a blister on the foot that he does have, and I started crying straight away because I was like, is this going to be the same as what's happened last time? But the NHS was so good this time round, that they basically had done some scans, and diabetes actually starts to narrow the veins and things in your body as well, which is then why he had that stroke, as that happening. And they had to operate on his leg because they found that 3 of his sort of artery veins, whatever they were at that time, were blocked, and his foot was never going to get better until they did this operation. Otherwise, he was set to lose that leg as well. And when they'd done that operation, which was only about 6 months ago, his foot is now healed properly. It's now gone back to normal. But it's really hard because I can't imagine what he sees the world through his lens. And he is very frustrated in general because of his situation. And it's hard on me because he takes that out on me. Like, I have to listen to it. And it's hard when it's someone that you're married to and you see them as they were from what they were, because I've been married for 18 years, so I know him longer than this. So I remember him as he was when I met him to what I see what he is today. And then and on a mental health perspective, it does hurt because he says my dad passed away when he was 56 as complication of diabetes. So he often tells me I might not be here for long. And that's really hard for me to hear as a wife. Because I always say to him, look, that's God. Like, when your time is written, it will happen. But he's like, I'm trying to prepare you. I want to be here, but I'm preparing you. I'm not well. Tons of hospital appointments, everything. But I understand why he says it, because he wants to get me, like, mentally prepared. But I refuse to believe it because it's like it's God's time, like, when that happens. But mentally, it has, like, ruined him, I think, because he thinks his life's been taken away from it. So sorry, Joe.
No,
I'm getting emotional because it's my lived.
Thank you so much for sharing, Aisha. I think the bit that I was going to say is that's why I was saying with Mukhtar, I think there's often not enough mental health support with diabetes, and that it's an absolute change of lifestyle. And I think, Sam, you did a really good way of explaining how relentless it is. It's not like going on a diet. It's not like it's
day in,
every
day
day,
out. It's every day.
decision.
And every decision, because my husband will sometimes go to me, do you want to do X? And I just go, I've made enough decisions today. At this point, I don't care what we do. Tell me what we're doing. I will cope with it. At this point, I just don't need another decision.
Yeah, just to add is one of these that you're talking about. We had to fight for this to get it through the NHS because they wouldn't give it to him.
It's ridiculous how much you have to fight for it, and it's not necessary. NICE say that we have the right to this equipment. You have a right to mental health. I'm really lucky. I live in Ipswich, and Ipswich has such a good endocrinology department. We actually lost the guy who set it up, Dr. John Day, recently, and most of us are so thankful because we're not seen in a hospital. And I know that sounds really odd because we're on the hospital grounds, but we have our own building, which means we're not seeing sick people. We're taught that actually there are impossible days. There are days when nothing you seem to do is correct, but actually you're empowered. What do you want to do?
Yeah,
and
which is great.
they offer counselling, and I would say, Aisha, it sounds like he needs some counselling. He needs some help. You both need some help. You need support, because that's unreasonable of him to behave that way. I'm sorry. My husband would give me very short shrift if I did that.
No, do you know what it is? But it's a cultural thing with us as well. It's hard to navigate because of the cultural things that we are so stuck with as well. But I think, like, from my perspective, it's my lived experience. It's my life. As you just go into autopilot because you know that this is what you have to do, and you just carry on. You have to, because otherwise who else is going to do it?
Harriet, you've got your hand up. You wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to reach out to you, Aisha. My husband is diabetes too, and he has had a lot of life-changing illnesses on top of his diabetes. He's very like your husband. He can talk to me, he'll tell me how it affects it, and that anger sort of, it's not anger, he means it, but he's just frustrated. And you know, he was very active in sport, and his life now is sitting on the sofa, relying on me, asking him to do counselling and to talk to someone, but he doesn't need it because he can talk to me. He doesn't realise the weight that puts on us and the difficulties. So Aisha, please personally reach out to me, because I have a friend who has the same struggles with her husband, and we find just having a good old whinge at each other lifts some of that off sometimes, because it's someone else in the same position. So if you want to lean on me, darling, reach out. That's all I wanted to say to Aisha. Okay,
Harriet, thank you so much. Thank you, Harriet.
Thank you.
I'll bring in Mohammed, who is an engineer within Openreach, and he's also got type 1 diabetes. Mohammed, I wanted to ask you, how do you find being an engineer and managing with type 1 diabetes?
To be honest with you, because I've been living with it for 28 years now, I feel like I've got a better grip of it. But like everyone else has mentioned, that's decisions on a daily basis. What do I eat? What can I eat to not inject? Making decisions like that on a constant basis, avoiding eating so I don't have to inject, having a hypo in the evening, but making sure that you're completely ready to start work the next morning. It comes with its challenges, but thankfully I've got a supportive circle around me. So my wife's very helpful in that aspect of things. I've taken it to my understanding to know that, all right, diabetes does come with its complications. I've got some retina damage behind my right eye at the moment, but it's not to the extent where I need to worry about it. But over time, obviously, it might get worse. But like everyone says that, you know, things on the NHS you've had to fight for. I used to privately fund my own continuous glucose monitoring system before Libra was even available. It's just because I wanted to get a better grip on my diabetes. And thankfully, I think for the past 7 to 8 years, I've not had any concerns or any stresses regarding my health condition. Even to the point like my colleagues that I work with know I've got the condition because they see the Libra on my arm, but prior to that, they never knew. So even from a mental health perspective, don't get me wrong, you do constantly worry sometimes that, okay, how short is my life because of the complications that can come because of diabetes. But
Mhm.
overall, I think if you just give it your best and just make it a priority over everything else, everything just seems to be falling into place for me.
Thank you. Thanks, Mohammed. And
No
Mohammed, you
problem.
know, a few times we've heard about the Libra. Can I just get you to describe what it is? So you've described that it goes on your
Yeah,
arm.
yes.
What does it do?
So it's basically a continuous monitoring, glucose monitoring system. It's
Hmm.
got the functionality of bleeping when your sugar levels go low and when they go high.
Okay.
So what happens, you set the ratios that you want it to bleep at. So mine sets at 13.3. So if my blood sugars get to 13.3, it'll sound an alarm saying, all right, now it's time for you to inject. It
Right.
shows me which direction my blood is heading in. So it's got arrows on it. So it's either straight line pointing upwards, and then you can decide, all right, have I had anything to eat? How many carbohydrates? Because I use something called the Daphne principles. I'm not sure if any people are aware. So it's basically a ratio you work with. For every 10 grams of carbohydrates, it's 1 unit of insulin. If you're
Mhm.
on a 1-to-1 ratio, if you're on a 2-to-1, it's 2 units of insulin for 10 grams of carbs. So mine fluctuate throughout the whole day. But thankfully, my consultant is quite in touch with me. So she gets in touch like every 3 months and we just review everything. So this Freestyle Libra that I wear, it tracks all of my data. So it
Okay.
shows when I'm having my peaks and when I'm having my lows and what I can do to implement to get better control of my diabetes.
Okay. And Mohammed, how do you find it with like being an engineer out in the field? Do you find that it stops you from doing anything, or are you like,
So what I do, I treat it like driving, right? So they say to be able to drive your vehicle, your sugar levels have to be above 5.
yeah.
If my sugar levels are below 5, I will stop what I'm doing because I don't know at what point I'm going to fall off the other end and won't know what the hell's going on.
Of
So
course.
even now, when I climb poles and stuff, I've made it my own policy to ensure I check my sugar levels when I'm climbing on a pole because I don't want to get up there and be at 3.8 and then lose my legs completely. I'm just hanging there until someone comes and rescues me.
Of
So it's just
course.
these little things that I implement myself, just to make it easier for myself. And even like now, I bring lunch from home because going out to eat's too much of a headache. Like if
Mhm.
I go to McDonald's, how do I work out? All right, this say portion of fries is this many grams of carbs and bits like that. So yeah,
McDonald's is one of the better places because McDonald's will
yeah,
tell you.
yeah, because that
I
sheet
mean,
behind the tray
ironically,
gives you everything, doesn't it?
McDonald's is one of the really if I go down to the BT canteen in one farm, I'm at a loss. There is no information. There's no information about portion sizes,
Yep.
how much fat and protein there are, which can affect how the insulin works. It's really poor. But Mackie D's will tell me exactly how many grams, exactly what it's go away, exactly the fat content. Yeah. And that's the ironic thing. A chocolate bar has it written on it what its carbohydrate is.
Yep.
An apple that I buy from the canteen has no clue. It's a guess. It's a wild guess.
And some like, what would you use to try and find that out? Could you Google what an apple had,
I
for
could
example?
Google, but I don't carry a pair of scales with me.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Okay.
I
So
think that's fair.
I love when people, oh, you're really healthy, you've got no complications, you must. I did a 100-mile cycle ride across London to raise money for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Fund, now called Breakthrough Diabetes. I did that on my own.
Wow.
You
Amazing.
can do things. It's about the planning. I didn't do that, decided yesterday and did it the next day. I planned it. I knew where I was in my menstrual cycle because I have nearly a 5 unit a day. So we take insulin per day. I program into my pump a basal rate that copes with my circadian rhythms and when my body releases stores from my muscles and from my liver. You then put food on top of that. But if you do exercise, people always say, oh, well, exercise, you need less insulin. Actually, for the first hour and 2 hours when I was that fit, I actually needed nearly 110% what I normally did to cope with my body releasing that glucose storm. So this is a hugely complex, movable beast, and that's not including if you've got an injury, if you've got any stress going on.
Of course.
There's a really nice slide. Somebody did a poster, 42 things that impact insulin. I mean, it's what you're imbibing, it's what you're, including medicine, how much insulin you're taking, how much glucagon you're taking. And finally, the stresses you're encountering. And that stress can be your environmental stresses, the weather. The weather can make a difference.
Thank you.
So
No,
the human body is hugely adaptive, and when you're not diabetic, that just happens all in accordance. And if you're not diabetic, your body does it for you. It doesn't have to get it right. My HbA1c is very good. Often I get nagged about it because I aim to be as close to normal glycemia as possible, normal blood glucose ranges. But actually, when they put tools like the Libre, I use a Dexcom on normal people are not in range all the time.
of course.
They're
Sam, thank
flexing
you.
quite dramatically. So there's often this appreciation that we have to be safe.
Absolutely. Sam, thank you so much for sharing, and everybody else, thank you also for sharing your journeys. What I'd like to do is just bring in Dr. Hector Goma quickly, as I'm conscious of time. I just want to ask you, Doctor, how can someone reduce the risks of diabetes? And I guess and a second question, why are people from South Asian heritage backgrounds and Afro-Caribbean backgrounds more prone to having diabetes?
Well, I'll answer the question in reverse. I'll start by saying that if you're South Asian or African Caribbean, you have to choose your parents carefully. So that's the answer, really. That's just the answer. I think there's a lot of work going on around genes. Definitely, research has shown that there are some genes which have to do with the way insulin works. And those genes, one, are not as effective amongst our people. That's one. The next thing is that I learned this from an obesity consultant in America, watching one of our YouTube videos, that when we eat, in the brain, one part of the brain tells the body to deposit the food as fat. The other part of the brain tells the body to break down the food, to break down the glucose. Now, for people who are South Asian or African, you are more likely to have the part of the brain that tells the body to deposit the food, and the fat deposition, it's different from where it is deposited amongst Caucasians. And that's why you are more likely to find truncal obesity. And truncal obesity is a big risk factor for type 2 diabetes. So our genes and then the way fat is distributed. And then, of course, our diet. I mean, if you go to an African party or a South Asian party, our foods are rich rice, bagari, and all of that. So it's high carbohydrate, high density foods. And then for many of us, our food portions are naturally large, and our life revolves around food, not sandwiches and so on. So you put all of that together, our genes, the way our body deposits fat, and then the kind of foods we eat, and then you put in the socioeconomic factor. Look at what happened with COVID time. We are likely to be walking around the clock trying to send money to family, friends, cousins, parents, and all of that. So we kind of disregard our body. We kind of work on urbanization, so sedentary lifestyles, working around the clock. So when you put our genes, our lifestyle, then the environment we live in, most of us would live in environments and do things that are less active. So all of those factors make us more likely to come down with diabetes. And that is why it is really, even in terms of making age for doing the screening test, if we say BMI over 30 and above for Caucasians, even in the NHS, we look at those who are maybe 28 and above. I just want to say that it's really important because of this genetic undertone of predisposition. Everybody who is diabetic or pre-diabetic, ensure that your siblings, your children, in terms of lifestyle and early risk. There's a diabetic risk score on diabetes.org.uk website. Let everybody get to do their risk score and ask their GP if they're not called in to say, my risk score is elevated, I want to do a diabetic screen. And most GPs would honor a request for a test, even if your person is 30, 35. If your risk score is high and you ask your GP for a blood sugar test, almost every GP will honor that request.
Oh, okay.
They're better
Thank you.
now. But if you have trouble with your GP, pharmacies will also screen. So any pharmacy will do that for you. If you are at all suspicious that something isn't right and you're not getting joy with your GP, the pharmacy will do you a blood test or urine test.
That's great. That's great advice to share as well, Sam. So if you are concerned, please do follow some of the advice that's given. I'm conscious that we've gone over. And
for type 2, it's actually more important to get tested than it is for type 1. Type 1's quite dramatic. It's really obvious.
yeah,
With type 2, the sooner you get a diagnosis, the better.
of course. Is type 2 more harder to tell that you've got it, Doc, if we come to you?
I mean, most type 2s are asymptomatic.
Okay.
And 90% of people living with diabetes are type 2. It's a lifestyle disease predominantly. So they are asymptomatic and they can have the so-called 40s, tired, testy, thinner, and toilet are the 4 classical. But then things like wounds that don't heal quickly, recurrent thrush, recurrent burrs, those are all possible signs of diabetes.
Okay, no, perfect. Thank you. I'd like to thank all of our speakers today. I am conscious that we have gone over, and I want to thank everyone for staying on and listening. I think we could probably keep going and speak about it even more because we've got so much that we could learn about and so much to share, of course. But thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. There are other lunch and learns coming up from next week as well. Please look on our workplace page and on the BT Group workplace page for more information. It's also the sign-up details are also in the Able to Lean In chat. But thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you, Dr. Hector Goma, for agreeing to come on as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.